Hello, and welcome to this week's podcast episode, Discerning the Lies from the Truth with Reverend Cheryl Kincaid. This episode does have some trigger warnings we want to mention to you up front. There are mentions of abuse, sexual harassment, rape, incest, and molestation. It's filled with wonderful resources, but we want to be upfront that those topics do come up. Today's ways to engage include what is a misconception you have about your life. For example, Reverend Cheryl shared her misconceptions with her faith as she continued to learn and grow throughout her life, understanding that there isn't a correct way for a Christian woman to feel or act. It doesn't make you any less of a person. Is there a misconception you had about your life when you were younger that you outgrew? What did you learn that made you realize this? And how has this affected you going forward? Or do you need to revisit some things and do that exact thing, decide what is actually true for you and what isn't, that you need to move on from, move forward from, heal from? Is there something you want people to know about yourself? Share your story with us and connect with others who have similar experiences like Reverend Cheryl did. To find all the ways you can connect with us and comment, go to embracinglayers.com. You'll find all of our socials there. You can leave us messages on our socials. Go to our Substack, the Embracing Layers Network Substack at The Feel Podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Take good care and enjoy this really powerful episode, Discerning the Lies from the Truth with Reverend Cheryl Kincaid.
Talk to me about prioritizing self-care in your life, what that journey's been like for you, where you see it having space in these environments that you work in. So talk to me about your journey, understanding, and what you're experiencing and seeing within this topic.
So self-care, I think, is difficult for a lot of Christian women. And I think for obvious reasons, I have said in other interviews, and it's the truth, that the most important thing in my life is Jesus Christ, because he saved me. And of course, I live my life in gratitude to that.
Sure.
I made the mistake when I was in my teens, or maybe as a young woman, that dying to myself and taking up the cross, I used it as a type of self-hatred where I didn't take care of myself.
Yeah.
And a lot of it came from a space that I wasn't taken care of as a child. So I think there's some people who are taken care of in their biological homes, and they understand that their needs need to come first, or need to come have a primacy in their life so they can serve God.
Yeah.
But if you come from a home where those needs aren't met, you don't really understand how to take care of yourself, and you find yourself in constant want.
Yeah.
And I was going to be in a lot of want because I came from a family that was borderline homeless. And part of the journey was I didn't have that support system to fall back on during the lean years when you're working your way through college, like a lot of my roommates had.
Yeah.
So that was going to be a wanting time anyway. But I was also pursuing a career in the church. And the church does not treat women well financially. Where a man, there are even churches that say women can teach and preach and so can men. But by the way, we pay the men. We don't pay the women.
Yeah.
By the way, we have to pay a man a living wage, but a woman, she's probably going to get married anyway, and she's probably not going to stay. And maybe she's just going to Bible college to get a husband anyway. That whole mindset was difficult to deal with. Now, before I don't want to poison your audience, because I've had some men in my life who have stood up for me and provided for me. There was a man who was a Sunday school teacher who knew I was going through a rough time, and I was being bullied and harassed at my high school. And he paid my way to go to a Christian high school just to find some relief from that. And he really could not afford it. I met his wife later in life, and they had to give up a car. They were a working class family to do it. So I don't want to say all men, but I have bumped into different Christian organizations that expect the woman to give her all, but don't expect to financially compensate her the way a man does.
Yeah.
So it's taken some work in my life growing up with this image that women should be always self-sacrificing. You know, to your audience who grew up in an evangelical family, you might know the story Pride and Prejudice. I think everyone, if they haven't read the book, they saw the movie.
Yeah.
I think we've done to Proverbs 31 to something that Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice addresses. If you remember the scene, she's at Darcy's house. She's walking around the room with Mrs. Bingley.
Mm-hmm.
Miss Bingley likes Mr. Darcy, and Mr. Darcy likes Elizabeth. And they're talking about the ideal woman. And Darcy says he's maybe only known 5. And Miss Bingley, who wants to present herself as the ideal woman for Miss Darcy, says she must have something about the languages, come from a good family, and there must be something in the air that she walks. And Darcy, I think, probably wanting to get Elizabeth's attention, said, and she must improve her mind by constant reading and be intelligent, because that's who Elizabeth is. Mm-hmm. And Elizabeth says, I wonder that you even knew 5. I've never heard of such a woman. And if she existed, she'd be a horrible thing to behold. I think the Christian world has done that to Proverbs 31.
Yeah.
Raised a monster, someone who's wonderful and never loses her temper and has convictions in the faith, but is never opinionated. And takes leadership, but is always flattering the men, and makes her own mayonnaise and homeschools and never loses her temper with her kids. That woman is a horror to behold. She does not exist.
Yeah.
So in the Christian world, I was trying to be Proverbs 31, and I got taken advantage of financially again and again, until finally I just learned to say enough and stop it. I had to file a lawsuit because I was hit by a woman who went to my church in her car, and the pastor wanted me to be a submissive woman to his leadership and not do the lawsuit. And that's when I said, enough. I'm a human.
Yes.
I'm not a woman. I am a human. And as a human, I need certain respect and certain dignity. And one of them is to take care of myself financially.
Yeah.
And learning to do that, if you're a minister, and those of you who go to churches, you may not know this, pastors have to negotiate their own salary. The denomination has a bottom level that you can't go beneath, but they have to negotiate it. And it's tricky even for a male pastor, because you want to be Christ-like, but you have to take care of yourself. But I think it's especially tricky for women pastors, because we've been taught to be submissive.
Yes.
And in my home, I was taught that you turn the other cheek. And because my father was abusive, it meant putting up with a lot of things that I never should have gone through. That was not God's will. And learning to stand up and say no, and say, you can't treat me that way. And you may not yell at me, you not speak to me in that voice, is a skill that I've had to nurture in my adult life, because it was not given to me as a child.
Wow. Well, you really addressed nicely here the confidently setting boundaries piece. You had to learn that. You had to learn to value and know your own voice was worth being heard, that you were worth being taken care of, that you were worth having financial stability, that removing these stigmas and ideas. Because let's say a woman does decide to get married. Let's say a woman does decide to have children, which, by the way, she's not required, and she's not any less worthy or valuable as a woman if that's not what she feels called to or aligned with. God has many different callings and alignments and passions for all of us. She still is worthy of making an income, a living wage. And and that should not be a woman versus man thing. This antiquated idea that only the man is the financial provider. That's just not true. And honestly, in our capitalistic society, not really sustainable. I mean, so there's so many pieces that go into that, but you learn to speak up. How was that for you as you started setting these boundaries and finding your way? How did you find spaces that was received well in? Where did you kind of find your people?
Well, one of the I won't say gifts, one of the great trials I went through that I learned basically to start to stand up for myself. So when you grow up in an abusive home, and especially if you're a Christian woman, you may have the idea that my parents did this because they're disobedient to God, but I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to only date Christians. I'm going to only associate with Christians so this abuse won't happen to me. And that's what I did. I only dated Christian men, but statistically, I found Christian men who were abusive. But what my step and I used to say, I would try my best because I thought I needed to be a Christian witness in my home. To not get angry. In fact, for one of my abuses, I would ask forgiveness of him that I hated him, which is so unhealthy, so sick. But I'll give myself a break. I was 11, 12 years old?
Yeah, trying to figure out how to navigate this space in a safe way.
And to survive. You know, when there's violence, you have to survive.
Yes.
And the myth, this is why I don't like when people say just leave. Abusers will kill their prey even after she leaves, the survivor.
Yeah.
But when I finally did grow up, I joined a Christian theatrical company thinking that I was doing the right thing. And unfortunately, I was in a theological conversation with a guy, and I got him angry, and he hit me.
Wow.
And I remember on my back 3 times, 1, 2, 3. And I remember the room went silent, and someone said, "So-and-so, did you hit her?" And I walked outside, and what occurred to me is that he hit me. It happened in a Christian environment.
Yeah.
It happened in Christian mission. It happened even though we were talking about scripture. There was no alcohol, no drugs, and the violence followed me.
Wow.
And I went, before I did anything, I prayed. I said, God, and this was 1978, if it was now, and someone would have called the police, I hope they would have.
Right.
But in those days, I came in and someone had a stern word with him. And I had a stern word with him. And I said, you don't ever hit someone. But I refused to let myself get angry because I did not believe in righteous anger. I had to learn that.
Yeah.
And I just said, you don't ever hit no matter what happens, like he was a preschooler.
Wow.
As opposed to just saying, don't put your hands on me. But I didn't have that righteous anger. It all been squished out of me.
Yeah.
So the space that I needed to find after I left that theatrical company and started to go to school, I had to find that I had to come to the realization people are going to hurt you, Christian or non-Christian.
Yeah.
I had to learn that not everything was spiritual, although it all has spiritual ramifications. Some things were behavioral.
Yeah.
And I had to learn the idea that the prophets were angry. So the Lord had to teach me a different way to look at the scriptures. Now, I had a lot of the scripture memorized, but I was looking at them through codependent eyes.
Right. Yeah.
So I had to clean off my glasses. And it wasn't overnight, by the way. I started to attend therapy. I started to have flashbacks about my own abuse. I was lucky enough to go to a church that had some MFTs that were doing their internships, service me for free, which a lot of women don't.
Yeah.
And I had to learn this concept of righteous anger.
Yeah.
And that I had a space that people couldn't violate. And that my abuse occurred to me because my big confusion was my dad went away to prison and accepted Christ. Then he came back and abused anyway.
Wow.
That abuse is a cycle. It's a fact of life that indeed, if I read the scriptures with honest eyes, I'm going to see it's in the Bible.
Yeah.
I'm going to see that people do get abused. And I'm going to see that God enables us, empowers us out of it.
Yeah.
And empowerment is not a bad word.
No.
And I think a lot of Christian women, especially the one from my world, I was raised in an evangelical church, and I loved my church for a lot of reasons, so I don't want to put it down, but they believed in that horrible umbrella of authority. And I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's okay. So the idea that your husband is the umbrella, you have to go through him to get to God. Now, as a kid, I was realizing already that it was wrong when my dad started to sin again.
Yeah.
And I confronted my youth leader saying, but our faith is atomistic. There is one mediator between us and God the Father. It's Jesus.
Yeah.
And my youth leader got mad at me, but I took that anger with me. And as I was starting my recovery, I said, wait, that applies to what I'm going through here, that anger is a good thing to have.
Yes.
And I started to attend adult children of alcoholic groups and AMAC groups against the advice of a lot of Christian leaders who believed it was secular humanism. And I had to develop my own theology with the help of counselors that were in my life and other people that I found in the recovery world. But I had to learn that basically that what happened to me was not God's will. It was not God's plan for me. It was something called sin. And it's unfortunate. In fact, it's tragic, but it happens to 1 out of every 3 women, 1 out of every 10 men. And we're all keeping it as the secret.
Yes.
When I went through PTSD, I started to have nightmares and hear breathing at night. And I lived in a discipleship house of 8 other women. And they were praying with me because we were sure it was demons. And then one night we ended up talking all night, me and 3 other girls. And all of them had been through a molestation situation. Wow. When I was in seminary, we had to divide up into tables and talk. And I ended up at a table with all women. There were 6 of us. Every one of them had experienced sexual harassment in the church.
Wow. And
we all sat there looking at each other.
Yeah.
And each one of them, it was blamed on us.
Oh, yes. It's always
right.
Yeah. It's whether it's how you dress, how you approached it. The responsibility is historically put on the women. And where's the responsibility of the men to act honorable?
And so what troubled me, there was this one woman in our table, and I have to say she was gorgeous. There was no other word for it. She was physically gorgeous. And I told her that I had a pastor tell me, well, Cheryl, you're such a strong Christian. You bring out the anger in men because they sense anger in you. And she told me what she was told is you're so physically beautiful that men are tempted by you. So you bring out the anger in them. Jeez. And then I finally told her, maybe there's just a lot of angry men out there. Yeah. It has nothing to do with us.
Oh, absolutely. And just, again, what the expectations are and the responsibilities that are taught starting when we're very little kids, especially in these spaces of this is what we expect from boys. This is what we expect from girls, instead of like, we are all to act honorably and kindly and empathetically and humbly. It's such an interesting dynamic and still there. Thank you for sharing that, because it goes really well into, you talked about the PTSD piece and the dreams piece, taking care of our emotional health, our mental health, our physical health. They're all connected. And these things have an impact. And if we're not, you talked about how so many Christian women don't feel safe or free to feel anger, to express anger, when anger is an emotion that we were given to help give us clues on something that was wrong, something that needed to be dealt with in some way to protect us, that we're being harmed possibly in some way. And if we're not allowed to express that or feel that, it stores up in our bodies, and it's going to come out in some other way. So talk to me about your journey with this emotional, mental, physical health connection.
Well, yeah. So one thing I had to learn, and I think a lot of people, it takes them a while, is they have to learn that there's help out there. Yeah. You might have to be your own advocate. I had to look for therapy that was free. I had to go outside of my faith experience at one time, and I found therapists that respected my faith experience. So within the Christian community, there's this idea you have to go to a Christian counselor.
Yeah.
Well, if all the Christian counselors charge an arm and a leg, and I don't have any money, I can't go to them.
Exactly.
If I got some free counseling at a local mental health clinic, most therapists are trained to respect your faith heritage.
Yeah.
That they draw the boundary. I need you to respect my belief in Jesus. I'm not here to defend my faith. If you bring it up, I'm not going to come back. I don't want to be an apologist with you. We need to talk about the pain. And I had a woman at a secular, at San Diego State University. And I don't know if she was a Christian or not, but because she knew I was a Christian, she used Psalms 23 to help walk myself out of anxiety.
Wow.
So it's not, so non-Christian therapists are nothing to be frightened of, but you have to be your own advocate.
Yeah.
And if you can't find a therapist that does it for free, you find another one. Find a support group who will see you for free. There's Debtors Anonymous. There's Adult Children of Alcoholics. There's Codependents Anonymous. These are support groups that are for free. Don't be codependent to your counselor and say, well, I think they deserve to be paid if you can't afford them. Find someone that you can afford and fight with your insurance company.
Yes.
To find someone you can afford. So that's one thing I would say. And educate yourself. There's lots of literature out there.
Yeah.
So the first recovery book I read was very inexpensive. It's still on Amazon.com. It's called Outgrowing the Pain.
Mm-hmm.
It was a couple of dollars then. It's a couple of dollars now. Some of my books are on Kindle are just a couple of bucks. Carrie's Thorn is just like $4 on Kindle.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to pay an arm and a leg. I know there's very good books like Courage to Heal, but they're very expensive. And if you're working a minimum wage job, then you've got to go cheap on it.
Yeah.
Find the books that you want to and educate yourself through reading the literature that's out there.
Yeah.
There's really good literature out there.
Yeah.
For me, and I know this is not true for all survivors of abuse, but for me, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous have helped me. And as a Christian, I have not found them threatening. They just help me because they're steps that help me parent myself. I received no parenting anywhere from how to make my bed to how to balance a checkbook.
Yeah.
The statements like one step at a time and let go and let God have been lifesavers for me.
Mm-hmm.
And there are Christian groups that meet with people for free. Make sure they respect your boundaries. Mm-hmm. But if you can get help for free, you should try to get it for free if you don't have a lot of money. If you have a job where you have a decent wage, it is such a good investment. Yeah. Also for free, there was not for free. Also, what I did to help me was I needed to realize that psychiatric drugs play a role in my recovery. Now, I'm not on them now. Mm-hmm. But for about 3 years, I had to be on some drugs to help me deal with the anxiety of the nightmares and flashbacks.
Yeah.
I would say I'm fortunate in my health experience that as I learned to journal and answer my journaling and accept my inner child, I have not had nightmares and flashbacks as much. But we're talking about I had them for close to 10 years.
Wow.
So I'm saying there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it wasn't 3 years. It wasn't 6 months. It wasn't 2 weeks. There was 10 years that I worked through it. I read a lot of John Bradshaw's books, Healing the Shame That Binds You.
Yeah.
They were helpful for me. And this is why I wrote my books. They're biographies of women who've gone through this.
Yeah.
But learning to accept that this was a life thing. It was a human thing. It was a thing that everybody goes through. And as you go through it, learning that there are touchstones, that you're not crazy. You know what? You can handle the emotions. They're not going to destroy you. And that you can find a way upwards. One of the gifts I have that I learned when I was reading something, a study that really helped me, that's been a gift to me. In my car accident, the gas tank started to leak and they thought the car was going to blow up. So they were rushing to get me out before it wasn't time to get jaws of life. So I was left with this sense of claustrophobia.
Oh.
And in my job, I have to go to hospitals twice a week because I work as a chaplain as well.
Okay.
And a nurse once offered, because I said, can I take the stairs? She says, we don't like people with crutches with a cane taking the stairs. Can I ride in the elevator with you? And I said, okay. And the anxiety went down. She says, there's a study on that. She went to a computer and gave it to me. And in the studies, people with claustrophobia, when they have someone with them, it cuts the anxiety level to 75%.
Wow.
I noticed when someone was in the elevator with me, I wasn't having the anxiety attack.
Wow.
And so now when I'm in the hospital, I wait for someone to get in the elevator with me. This is a long way of telling you listeners, invite someone into the elevator with you.
Yeah.
You went through this alone once before. Don't go through it alone again.
Yeah.
Find a support group. Find someone that can walk you through it. And that's the joy of the 12 steps, is you can get a sponsor for free to walk you through it.
Yeah.
And find someone who can listen to you. And when you have the flashback, if you're in a romantic relationship, if you're married, educate your family. This is what I go through. Sometimes I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night and not want anyone to touch me, even if I'm crying. Please don't take that personally. I just don't need anyone to touch me right now.
Yeah.
Educate them in the sense of sometimes I just need to be alone and I need to journal.
Yeah.
And sometimes I can't be there for you. Yeah. And and I've had to educate friends of mine and roommates of this. Sometimes I have learned that there are people in my life with whom there's no love or respect for self. I can't talk them into loving or respecting me. So I have to walk away from the friendship. So I had roommates who wanted to help me reconcile with my mother. That can't happen. She doesn't have within her the empathy she needs for a child.
Yeah.
And I will never get that mother love from her. Yeah. And that's okay. I can grieve that and I can go on. Yes. But I don't have to go back and try to fix something. And that's true with my platonic relationships as well. Mm-hmm. When I meet someone in my life that for whatever reason they cannot show dignity and respect and boundaries, I can say without being angry, there ain't no good guy, there ain't no bad guy, it's just you and me. We don't agree. Like that old song.
Yep.
I can just say, I don't need the drama. We've outgrown each other. We need to find different friends.
Yeah.
And learn how to do that. And it's something that every pastor has to do in their job, because you have to have time off. But you also have to be there for them when they need you. Yeah. But I have to do it in my social relationships as well. Absolutely. And learning to take care of myself that way, learning to take care of myself by saying, I need to rejuvenate. I need to be alone. I need this time off. I need to just pray by myself. That kind of stuff is just part of me. And educating other people about what a flashback is and what a nightmare is. And it's not a nightmare like everyone has it. I usually get a hangover when I have a flashback nightmare. Wow. And I get over it. And you don't have to, I don't need anyone in my life saying, don't be sad. I can be sad. I'm fine with it.
Yes.
We talk about Psalms 23. There's this part in Psalms 23 that says, even though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will feel no evil, for thou art with me. Everybody has to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And the Hebrew word for death is ambiguity. It's shadowy place. Yeah. But when you walk through that, you may have to walk through it. You don't have to build your house there. Yeah. So if I find myself building my house there, I know something's wrong. Yeah. And that's when I need to say, what do I need to get out of this valley of the shadowy place? Yeah. What steps do I need to walk out of here? Because I don't need to build my home here. Right. I have to walk through here, Misery, trouble is mandatory. Everyone goes through trouble. Yeah. Misery is optional. We don't have to stay there. We can learn new behavior patterns. We can learn to love differently. We can learn to be kind differently. And it all starts with learning to be kind to ourselves. Yeah. It all starts with learning to love ourselves and giving ourselves time to heal.
Yeah. Yeah. You hit on so many important things there about what healthy boundaries look like, what it looks like to honor yourself, take care of yourself, value yourself, what it looks like. So many times in Christian spaces, there's a convolution or confusion between forgiveness and trust, and forgiveness and relationship. Yeah. You can forgive, and that doesn't mean that person is going to still have a place in your life. If they just, and you can't change other people. And they have to want to make the changes in themselves. And it starts with them seeing themselves as valuable and worthy of it. It starts with them having their own empathy, and it's not your responsibility to make them do, you can't, and it's not your responsibility to do that.
Yeah.
And it's not your responsibility to keep them in your life when they're not acting in a loving, kinding, honoring, respectful way. You can forgive people and move forward yourself. That doesn't mean you've got to bring them along with you. And I'm so glad you encapsulated that so beautifully and so well on all the ways that you have learned how to care for you, learned how to process your emotions, finding tools. We don't have to do it alone. It's therapists are given gifts just like the rest of us to help people. It's okay to go outside your faith space and you just set your boundaries and your expectations. But many times, sometimes they can be more helpful because they don't have a rhetoric that they're coming there more objectively, I think sometimes. Yeah, not always. Yeah. I've worked with Christian therapists too who are very effective and very good. So I don't want to say that none of them are, but also that fear of going outside the space. You have just done this beautiful job of seeing God in all of this and how God shows up for you and not being weighed down by the stigmas and narratives that aren't serving you in a healthy way and aren't truly loving, kind, empathetic, as I think you and I both agree God would have intended. And you've done such a beautiful job of encapsulating that in all of this. And this is, I really believe, especially with how you're showing up now, having these conversations, the books you've written really goes nicely into how we can support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically. I mean, you talked about that group of women that you ran into in school who had all experienced some level of abuse, and how you all were able to talk through that and realize, we don't need to believe these lies that we were responsible for this happening to us. We don't need to apologize for something that was done to us by someone else out of no fault of our own. It's, we are worthy. We are valuable. We deserve to show up as our truest, authentic selves and support each other in doing so. And I think in these books that you've written, these different women in their biographies and the hardships and abuses that they have faced is really such a great resource and tool to help other women in this journey. So just talk to me about how you got to the point of deciding the books were going to be a tool and resource that you wanted to offer.
Yeah, I will. I wanted to just backtrack a little bit. I want to talk about the difference between forgiveness and denial, because Christian women are beaten up with the word forgiveness.
Yes.
So in Scripture, in order to forgive someone, you must first confess. And confess means that you must admit that they did something wrong, that they did something wrong without excuse.
Yeah.
They didn't do it wrong because they were abused too, and you had to feel sorry for them. They didn't do it wrong because they had a hard day at work. David Finkelhor, who wrote a wonderful book called The Dark Side of Families, talks to a woman who says that her husband only beats her when he's drunk. And he asks her the pointed question, does he beat you when he's drunk, or does he drink so he can beat you? The reality is the behavior rests with him. So you must admit that, first of all, they did something wrong. You have to say that aloud, and that they take full responsibility for that wrong. And the only response to that is caution. So in the book of Matthew, when they wanted to make Jesus a king, the Bible says that Jesus did not trust them, for he knew what was in their hearts. So if Jesus can withhold trust, so can we.
Yeah.
Denial says what happened to me was not that bad, or maybe deserved, or maybe I brought it on. And denial hushes the voice of caution by saying reconciliation has to follow.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said, he's sitting there addressing a crowd, and someone asks who could be in the kingdom of heaven, and he brings a little child into their midst. And then he says, unless you become like a little child, you cannot enter the gates of heaven. And then he says, almost as if it's not related, but it's very related. He says, woe to the world for its offenses. For it would be better for someone to tie a millstone around its neck and cast themselves into the sea than to offend one of these little ones.
Mm.
And then he says, but such offenses must come. Jesus knew that little ones would get hurt. Vulnerable ones would get hurt. But woe to him through whom it comes. And then he says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. For it's better to be in heaven with one hand than in Guna hell with two hands. Well, because of abuse, that's talking about relationships.
Yeah.
If someone causes you to sin, cut it off. And I know a lot of women, or I've sadly been by the side of many women who go back to the abusive situation and they prefer hell with just one hand. Yeah, he hits me. Yeah, I have to hide the glass things and lock them up. Then to cut it off.
Yeah.
And so heaven does give us a sense to cut it off. When I wrote my books, I've written my whole life. I just didn't have the time. There were other things that took up my time to pursue them being published. But I wanted to address the issue of abuse, but I wanted to address it through a way that wouldn't be preaching at someone or off-putting.
Sure.
And nothing bothers me more than, and I know a couple of Christian books that have steps that aren't based on any literature. And I know in my life, it hasn't been a PowerPoint display. You go here, 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 and here. It's been, and I agree with Sigmund Freud. He says that mental health is a cycle. You go through it once, then you go through it again, then you go through it again. It goes up.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been like that. So the best way to do it was biography. And so I wanted to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. I wanted to talk about when I was facilitating a support group. In fact, we were talking about that movies that were made about survivors of incest and rape, even Christian movies, often painted the survivor as either a rape survivor either as a prostitute or drug addict or someone with an eating disorder, certainly a non-Christian. Or if she was a Christian, she was an angry Christian. And then she goes forward and accepts Christ or gives a prayer of forgiveness and she's all better.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that. So Carrie Thorne is a story about a girl who is a Christian when the abuse occurs.
Wow.
And we talked about, we wanted to write a story about a woman who's already a Christian when it happens, goes to a family that goes to church and it's happening and she still doesn't know what to do. And what the foster care system does to her. Wow. So we wrote Carrie Thorne for that. And how she has to figure out this big word that we use in theological circles called theodicy. Why does a good God allow suffering? And the book addresses that, but addresses it with her relationship with a boyfriend that she gets in the youth group, with her relationship with her best friend, Laloni, who's also suffering from generational abuse and alcoholism in her family. And how do they learn to have a voice for what's happening to them? And A Forgotten Door Called Home talks about the other caregivers in Carrie's life. Now she's old enough that she's trying to make her own home, and she finds out it's not that easy. Yeah. And so some of the characters we introduced in Carrie's Thorne come into A Forgotten Door Called Home. And they're Christian women who've also been through abuse, but have found a way to survive and to love and to give love. And Isabella, her employer, is starting a young family with her husband. And how do you incorporate your abuse so it doesn't destroy you? Yeah. And see yourself as a survivor, not so much as a victim. And so those books, my other books, I wanted to talk about Christianity because I accepted Christ one day after a fight between my mom and dad over love. And when one of my students me called it love. And I'd gone to Sunday school and heard a story that when you pray, you go to heaven. And I decided that love was the abuse. And if I went to heaven, I would not be in pain anymore. So we lived on a third story. I was going to throw myself out a window. Jeez. I didn't have the courage to do it. I was only about 5. I got up to the window, then I walked back to bed, and I tried to get up again and felt a warm hand on my stomach and heard a voice say, God is love. And that's when I accepted Christ. So it meant everything to me. But from the very beginning, my life didn't turn wonderful like all the Christian novels I read. And I read a lot where suddenly the dad would accept Christ and the family would get rich and they'd win a contest and they'd live in a middle-class neighborhood. All that, none of that happened. Dad didn't gel. He seemed to have a real conversion experience. But when he got back, his addictions took over again. My mother goes in and out of depression, and she can be very spiritual and be very cruel. And it's more to do with her mental health. So I wanted to write about two things. I wanted to write about poverty. And wouldn't you know, I found another Christian who wrote about poverty before me. His name was Charles Dickens.
Oh, and wow.
So I got this upside down, hearing the gospel through Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol.
Wow.
And you can get this on my website. You have to buy it through the publisher. They jack up the price if you buy it through Amazon because it's in the UK.
Got it.
But he uses the 4 lessons of Advent. He puts them in the mouths of the 4 spirits. Ebenezer means the Lord has brought me thus far. But he was a person of faith, and I know he didn't always live up to his faith. You may know because his movies that he had an affair. He does repent from it, but it's still there. But he understands the cycle of poverty and the struggle with faith because he had a father who also depended on God, and he ended up in poverty all the time. And what does it mean that you have to work and you have to trust God and there has to be grace? And I find it in all of his stories. So hearing the gospel through Dickens' A Christmas Story, and I wrote 2 books for children. One is The Little Clay Pot. And this came after I kind of fell apart with my PTSD. So in Jeremiah chapter 18, when the potter is making the clay falls apart in the potter's hand. And the potter says, can't I make something different? And that's what I had to learn because I was striving to be the Proverbs 31. And I remember reading the Bible study in tears as a woman shared. And I don't think what she shared was wrong. It was how I heard it. She said, I don't remember a time when I haven't loved and trusted Jesus. That's an innocent remark, but I took it as she didn't remember a time that she'd ever been hurt.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, and she was from a sheltered woman, and she was from a Christian home. And it occurred to me, I'm never going to be you.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to be you, and I'm never going to be you. And I ran out and I cried, and my friends didn't understand what I was crying about. They thought I was crying because she had a boyfriend. I said, no. But then God kind of told me, I never intended you to be her.
Yeah.
She has a job and you have a job, and the job I have for you is just as beautiful and just as necessary. And that comes up, by the way, in A Forgotten Door Called Home. Carrie goes through that too. Because I misjudged her too.
Yeah. Yeah.
She had a different job. There's nothing wrong about being sheltered and being loved and cherished. That's what we want for everyone. Not all of us get that, but God can buy it back for something more wonderful.
Yeah.
And then the last one is the little candle that's frightened of the dark. And I use the Orthodox Church's colors for the Advent wreath. People get mad because I'm not using the Catholic churches. But each candle is telling the story of the Advent. Advent means coming, of Jesus coming. To one candle is frightened of the dark. I wrote it primarily about salvation because as a kid, I went through periods of depression. Partly because it's in my family. There's a biochemical tendency toward that. Partly because we were borderline homeless and going hungry all the time. And I had been sexually abused. But I used to think that my depression meant that I lost my salvation. And so this book is written some for kids and adults to show you that you can't lose your salvation. And that's within the story. It's an Advent study that talks about that, that I know that I'll just say one line in it. I know the darkness comes very close to you, little flame, but darkness cannot put out light. Light will help you see your way through the darkness. And I want to let Christian children as well as adults know that no darkness can ever put out your light.
Yeah.
God's light will help you see your way through the darkness.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. Those are such beautiful examples of how have taken your story and your understanding and your faith and your journey to help and give resource and give voice to these voices that so many times faith spaces shy away from talking about, having good resources for. You've spoken so much to so many great resources available out there. Thank you so much for all of that. The importance of setting and coming back to your why and your values in everything you do. You have a very solid faith and belief that you have navigated. And by trusting yourself, I feel like, and trusting your intuition on what is right and what is not right and healthy for you. So talk to me about that.
Well, I've told people before, and we talked about this during the Lenten service, that everyone in the Christian tradition, the dark night of the soul is common.
Yeah.
All you do is read the hymn writers' stories, and you'll find people that have the dark night of the soul again and again and again.
Yeah.
But what I tell Christian people going through, I had a very dramatic testimony, and I felt the presence of God in my life. But ever if you feel like you're going to leave the faith, and there's been times I felt like I was very close to it, there's a piece of me that have always said, but leave room for Christ to come back. In other words, leave that space for God to draw you back. Say, God, I believe, help thou my unbelief. Or, God, I just don't believe right now. I can't do everything, but I can do some things. So after my attack, I had a hard time reading my Bible because I had read that scripture. If Matthew 5, if a son asks a father for bread, will he give him a rock? And I felt like God had given me rocks at the time. And I see now how I was able to work through that. But I couldn't read my Bible. So the other option was that I could read hymnals. And so I started to read my hymnal and listen to Christian music. When I couldn't pray, I read Christian autobiographies. And again, not Christian fiction per se, but Christian autobiographies.
Yeah.
Because I got to know other people's dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
So face your Christianity. Know this, that you're going to go through a season of a dark night of the soul. It does not believe you're no longer saved. It does not believe that you've lost your faith. Doubt is an integral partner with faith. They work hand in hand. But certainty is also a part of faith. And God, who saved you in the first place, will bring you back. So for me, it's learning that God will bring me back. And it's taking time in the morning to let Jesus visit the wounds in my life. One of, when I was facilitating support groups, women would often come to me in tears saying that they'd gone to a retreat and thought they'd been healed. And then they came home and things were bad again. And I would try to share with them this, that you don't have one sore on you that says incest. And once that's healed, you're better.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of sores.
Yes.
There's a whole bunch of wounds. And maybe at that retreat, you found some healing. Write it down and write down about what you learned. Just don't say, I felt euphoria, because then you make God into a drug.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is what I learned. And this is how it's helping me. I learned at that moment, I felt that God saying, I love you and you're my child. I learned that God loves me and I'm his child. Write it down and then let the next wound come. So God and I have a time every morning where we talk about my answered prayers, the things I've learned, and the prayers I still don't understand, the pain that I still don't see. I still ask my Lord, why hast thou abandoned me? As Jesus said on the cross. And I say, will you minister to those wounds? And I just leave some silence where I hear Christian music. And I do it every morning. One of the mistakes I made when I was in my 20s is I thought that faith was certainty. It wasn't doubt. So when the times that it didn't seem God answered my prayer, I'd make up an answer. Well, I guess he did answer it and that someone was here. Or I guess he did answer it, the sun rose. Instead of letting me sit with the idea, it doesn't look like God answered that prayer. And I kept pushing it away and became manic in other areas. And this is where you find people overly doing for the church because they don't want to look at their doubt, overly doing. Eventually that doubt's going to catch up with you. So
Yeah.
I embraced my doubt, and every morning God and I deal with it. And I have a moment of saying, I believe, help thou my unbelief. And we revisit those painful spots. And as I talk about Freud saying it's a coil upwards, each time I revisit it, it's easier to revisit it.
Yeah.
And I just say, this is real, God. This is my place of doubt. This is the place that I may not see the answer till I get to heaven.
Yeah.
And you're good with that, and I'm good with it too. But I have to talk to you about it because I've got to live this relationship where I trust you. But this was a time where I didn't see your hand.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how so much, we are very uncomfortable sitting with the uncomfortable as humans. And it is a necessary part of our journey, and having that curiosity piece instead of the fear and trying to create a reality that's not really there to avoid the discomfort. It's such when you can learn to be curious and welcome that's where you really learn about how you're made, how you really build trust, how you really build understanding. And I think just the nuances of life, that there's just some things we're just not going to know. We're just not going to know. And being able to sit in the discomfort and get okay with that. I think that was such a beautiful display of, I think, authentically walking it out. And so I appreciate that so much. Living out of your own expectations versus others. You have very, very clearly done that and continue to do that. You're such a beautiful example of that. So talk to me about that expectations journey as it's evolved from the time you were young till now.
Yeah, I think that expectation journey, I think Christian women do get it very difficult. I had one leader, she passed away recently, who encouraged me in the ministry. But I had one very sexist leader who was certain I just wanted to study the Bible so I could be with boys.
Wow.
And he always put the sexist tropes on me. And when I would preach or something at church, and I remember some adults coming by complimenting me, and he says, but I just get embarrassed when you're up there. And he says, why do I get embarrassed, Cheryl? I think you should think about that. So the expectation
I think you should think about that, sir. That sounds like a you problem.
He's a creepy guy, but the expectation is learning to, because like everyone, I care about what other people say, but learning to say, I can listen to this voice and not this voice. Mm-hmm. But God put in me a voice that I have called you to preach. Mm-hmm. And that was louder than all the other voices. It was so loud that when I was in the hospital, I heard it when I almost died in my car accident.
Wow.
That this is what I called you. So I had to rebel, and I had to say, okay, God, I'm going to study because you're calling me, but I don't see it in scriptures yet. So that was part of it. Also, I did have individuals who thought I was going to succeed. I had individuals who thought I was going to fail and told me. And learning to listen to the voices who thought I would succeed is something that I had to do. But after I left, I left a really bad ministry situation where I was assaulted, and I realized that to get the kind of career I wanted to do, I had to go to college, and I was the first in my family ever to go to college. I had dyslexia because I went to a violence school. I could barely read.
Wow.
And when I said I wanted to study counseling, the counselor, not a therapist, the school counselor laughed at me and he says, you should study child development because then you can get a job. So I studied child development, but the Lord kept pushing me on. So there was that inner voice that this is what I called you to. And he would bring reinforcement, and then I would find ministers. I once dated this guy who was very unhealthy relationship. But I was crying to the pastor that I wanted him to marry me, this guy that I was breaking up with. Mm-hmm. And the pastor said, well, I don't think this guy is going to be a pastor because you think he's going to be a pastor. But he said, Cheryl, I think you're going to be a pastor. And I was stunned. It floored me.
Yeah.
It shocked me because this was 1983 and I just did not believe pastors.
Yeah.
And, but listening to that voice of him hearing me, and saying, I think you're going to be a pastor, and other people who've said it to me.
Yeah.
So it's learning to distinguish the voices. But I was fortunate enough to hear the inner voice of God. And I think that's there for everyone. You've got to find it, though, and turn off the phone 1 hour a day and listen to Christian music, or just in silence say, God, draw a picture of yourself. This is where it hurts. Will you visit this place? Or these are the lies that I believe. Write them down.
Yeah.
Help put truth to it. So I am writing another book now called A Hope and a Future, which is a Bible study for survivors of abuse. And that's one of the exercises, is to write down all the lies that you heard.
Yes.
I had a brother who would call me a bitch and a whore. And I never told anybody till one night at a prayer meeting. We were with all these other women. And they said, what can we pray for you, Cheryl? And because I didn't know they were bad words, I just said, calls me a bitch and a whore. And the women gasped and they were shocked and they gathered around me and they prayed. And I remember thinking, boy, they're taking this really seriously. This is really serious.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. And if you have to use it home, you have to go through those steps.
Right. Because that for you, that's what's been normal.
Yeah.
And so learning, when I go back to my brother yelling those words at me, remembering how those women responded at church to it.
Yeah.
That he was the one, and I know it happened because he was being abused too, but he was the one that was at fault in doing that, not me.
Yeah.
And perpetrators are great at blaming the victim.
Absolutely. They do a great job of creating shame and guilt and all of those things that we deal with so much. And sometimes the church doesn't deal with very well. And we talked about that a lot today. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for that important reminder of writing down the lies and dismantling those lies and discerning the lies from the truth. So many times we treat our thoughts as truth, when a lot of times our thoughts are just narratives that we've heard over and over again, but they're not truth. And so identifying those things that don't feel in alignment, that sound off, that don't line up with your values and your own value. So many things. And listening to that voice is so powerful, and shutting down the noise. I find it something for me that's really helpful, and I don't do it as often as I'd like to. And that's a choice. And I realize that we have to take accountability for our choices. But if I just shut everything down for 10 minutes and just sit in the quiet and allow things to just settle and make space and create space, because you have to have space to dismantle the lies. You have to have space created to unload the gunk and hear the voice and discern the voices that are for you and the voices that are not. And, so taking that quiet time is so powerful.
Yeah, it is. And not allowing someone else to define you.
Yeah.
You always start with it. You're created in God's image, and that He has a plan for you. And it's not the plan that if God has a plan for you, you better bet there's a lot of abusers who have a plan for you.
Absolutely.
Don't go on their plan.
Yeah.
Don't co-sign on their lies.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about hurting their feelings.
Yeah.
You can expose them.
Accepting the layered aspects of ourselves. You've done a beautiful job of really seeing where you've come from, understanding how and why things happen, but also making discernment between what was and wasn't your fault. What was, what circumstances created in you and that had to be discerned, had to be unpacked, had to be healed, that you needed to get help on. Calling out the lies and the dishonesty and the just incorrect, things being said in the name of God that weren't from God. Theology that's not really theology. I mean, it's theology in how it's being used, but you've done such a beautiful job of understanding that, unpacking that. But there's been a lot of difficult things in your life. So talk to me about accepting all those layers and parts of your journey.
Well, I think partly because we're human and there's sin in the world, everybody gets to go through some hard things. And we can ask why me, but we also can ask why not me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm part of the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think being a pastor, one of the privileges you get is to be with people during their darkest moment. And you realize as an adult, which I didn't as a child, I had it harder than my peers as a child, but all of us go through the dark night of the soul at different stages in life.
Sure.
Especially the ultimate one when our body doesn't do what we want it to do anymore.
Yeah.
But I think building a foundation of being loved, and as a Christian, and finding that in Jesus, because I didn't get it in my parents, will help me face the dark night of the soul later. Because I do have the and it's statistics prove this to be true, that men who've gone through PTSD and war, men who came from more stable family environments, had less PTSD, and it was less severe.
Wow.
And men who came from soldiers who came from unstable environments had worse PTSD. So the abuse at home did not prepare them for war. It did quite the opposite.
Wow.
And so when you nurture a child, you tell them you are loved, you are touched, there's safe touch, and you're wanted. And when you don't receive that, it's harder to get it. I have that wonderful testimony, the hand on my stomach. So I nurture my faith. I'm deliberate about it because I realize it has to make up for what I didn't get as a kid.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But the different layers is that, I'm just a person, in other words, I'm a human being. I'm a girl. I'm a writer. I'm a preacher, but I'm also an artist. So I have all these different layers that I bring to it. And I try to tell survivors this too, that, in Genesis 1 and 2, 7 times God calls life good. He says it was good. Life can be good. And when I look back in my childhood, as bleak as it was, there were moments of sheer goodness. Playing Star Trek with my brothers and sisters in the backyard. Doing the light bright and pretending to be the characters on Laughing till my sides hurt. So there was that spiritual euphoria of being close to Jesus, but there was also this life stuff going on.
Yeah.
And I think as survivors of abuse, of rape and incest, sometimes the world looks at us as tragic figures. And the reality is, no, we have the goodness of life within us too.
Yeah.
We have the ability to love and give love. We also have this trial we have to overcome.
Sure.
And having a holistic perspective of my childhood and my young adulthood has been helpful. Yeah. I think as a single woman, I get a lot of reinforcement from work. I love work and gardening. And when I was younger, people kept trying to fix me up with men, and it just wasn't working with me. Yeah. And I just had to come to the conclusion, now I'm 63, that's okay. This is the life I have, and I rather like it. I love my pretty little house. I love my garden. I love writing. I love reading. I love going to plays. And because I'm a pastor, I officiate at weddings all the time. So I love it. I can appreciate the joy of two people coming together and making a life as one. That's a wonderful gift from God. The Bible also says some people are called to be single. Yeah. And I don't think I've embraced it until my 60s, because up till then it's been, well, maybe. No, this is pretty good. But you embrace who you are, and you don't look over your shoulder and say, but I'm not like so-and-so.
Yeah. That comparison game will get you in trouble every time.
Crying, saying, I'm never going to be her. And God's saying, well, no, you're never supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that was never part of the deal. It's never the assignment. Yes. Oh, thank you. Oh, so good. Thank you so much for that. I'm just going to let that sit with people and simmer, because you did such a beautiful job of explaining that. Thank you. In Living Out Feel, finding empowerment, embracing layers, which your story is just such a beautiful example of. Talk to me about how this has affected the quality of the relationship with yourself, as well as your quality of your relationship with other people.
I think it's always there. And I've learned to embrace that it's always there. Now, there's always a sense of, I think this is for every human being, the grass is greener on the other side.
Yeah.
So the Bible says, compare not yourselves one to another, for they that compare themselves are not wise. That's found in 1 Corinthians. It's not a smart idea to compare your insides with someone's outsides.
Mm-hmm.
But occasionally I'll see someone who I think, boy, you didn't have to suffer. But I don't know what's going on inside of them. And I know eventually they will. So that's a silly way to live your life. But that is there sometimes too. Mm-hmm. So I have a best friend. She was a college roommate, and I went to see her recently. And we were talking about, just we're going over our lives since we've known each other for more 40 years, how things turned out different for us. I said, I'm okay as long as I don't compare myself with some of my friends, my married friends. And she said, I hope you're not comparing yourself with me. And she shared some of the things her small family's going through. And she's gone through a lot of things. And she has a very good marriage.
Yeah.
So it's for me, you can go into adult life thinking, that I was deprived and you were blessed. And don't stay there.
Yeah.
Start to learn that I was given a different road than you were, and I can have blessings too. They'll be different than yours.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you've been deprived or will be deprived.
Right.
I mean, just don't stay there. You have to come at one place and saying what happened to me was wrong, not to have happened. That's it, the idea. You have to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Don't stay there. Yeah. So you have to say, yes, what happened to me should have never happened.
Yeah.
But what happens to a lot of people should have never happened.
Right.
And I can find joy and I can find love and I can have moments of anger, then I can let it go.
Mm-hmm.
There's the time when someone asked Jesus, how many times should I forgive my brother? And he says 7 times 70. That's an eternal number in the Hebrew language. Each Hebrew letter has numeric value. And I think what Jesus was saying is that some sins are so egregious that you have to spend the rest of your life forgiving them. It's not going to just be one prayer of forgiveness. So yes, for the rest of my life, I'm going to be dealing with some of the abuse that my father and mother gave me. It's part of my life. Instead of pushing it away, it becomes a part of my sermons. It becomes a part of my writing. It becomes a part of my artwork, but it doesn't take away from the beauty of it. I can still see a really good Jane Austen movie and cry and laugh and listen to a love song and go square dancing and go kayaking and have a great time. It's not all colored by it.
Yeah.
But it certainly influences it. It certainly is. It's part of the colored glasses I wear that I look at the world in.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. So good. We are down to the rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
Okay. Well, prayer, studying, kayaking. I just mentioned that. I love to kayak, gardening, and singing.
All right. And 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
I want to feel rested. I have a vacation coming up. And pampered a little because of my vacation. Accomplished because I want to finish A Hope in a Future. And maybe a little bit more money because I have a new book coming out called Please Don't Move My Grandma's Chair.
Oh, wow. Oh, thank you so much for that. Reverend Cheryl, tell people where they can follow you, find you. You've got sermons online, how to get your books. Talk to us about that. And this will all be on our resources page on our website at embracingletters.com. But I also want to give you a chance to share that right now.
Yeah. Well, my YouTube page is at Cheryl Kincaid, that's CherylKincaid 5643. And my website is just Rev with no period, REV, then my name, CherylKincaid.com. And you've got my sermons and you've got links to all my books there. And you also can get my interviews are there as well. And also my blog is there as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such a rich conversation. So many resources, so many lessons. You have so much wisdom. I've just really enjoyed learning more about you and your story and your why and your values. You are a blessing in the Christian community. You're a blessing for women in these faith spaces. Anyone that comes across you. So thank you for the gifts that you are. Thank you for listening to that voice and trusting it, even while others around you might have been saying otherwise, because it's definitely clearly what you're meant to be doing. And for the podcast audience, visit these resources, take a look at these books, whether you're a Christian or in a faith space or not. There's so much value in what Reverend Cheryl has shared with us today about our value, about how to care for ourselves, about how we deserve to be treated, about how we show up for others, and about how we both heal and acknowledge the tough things while also recognizing the good and the blessings. There's so much nuance there, and being part of that whole journey and embracing that and knowing it's a lifelong journey. So she's given you so much to think about this week. So thank you so much again for your time. I so appreciate you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you having this podcast.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's the treat of getting to talk to women like you, and I'm so thankful for it every day. Audience, go back and listen, check out these resources, be encouraged today. There's so much that Reverend Cheryl has shared with us that offers so much encouragement and hope and support. Get those resources, get that support you need. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and find those places and people that will be for you, help you, guide you, and believe in you. And on that, we're going to wrap this podcast episode up. Thanks so much for being with us, and have a great week.